So I'd like to make two assumptions before I actually start the teaching in this particular tutorial. Assumption one is I'm assuming you don't drink. You're probably 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old, and therefore, probably shouldn't be drinking alcohol. We'll come to that in a second. And the second assumption I'm going to make within this tutorial is that if you're living in the UK, at some point in your future and in your adulthood, you are going to face the choice as to whether and how to drink alcohol, because alcohol is quite a dominant feature of UK and British culture. So therefore, it's quite likely you're going to face that choice. Almost every adult in the UK does face a choice of how they want to drink, if they want to drink, is it right for them, is it not for them. So I'm assuming that within this context, and I'm certainly not here to advise you on what that should be. That's your choice at that right moment. Now, with that all being understood, I want to introduce 4 points to you straight away. What is alcohol, first of all? It is a recreational drug. We're not going to get into the chemistry of it. We're not going to get into what alcohols are. I know you study those in chemistry, and you certainly will do when you get into GCSE time. I also want you to know that alcohol is made from fermented plants. So if you're thinking about things like wine, it's made from, or fruit, of course, it's made from grapes. If you're thinking about, for example, vodka, it's typically made from potatoes. If you're thinking about gin, it's made from berries and so on. That's the derivative. That's actually where it comes from. Also, alcohol consumption is illegal for anyone under the age of 18. Okay, so hopefully you won't be drinking until you're 18 at the very earliest, or maybe not at all, but that's the legal age in this country. However, minors, and we're talking here about people below the age of 18, not people that dig ores out of the ground, minors can drink beer or cider with a meal if accompanied by an adult. For example, my elder daughter is 17 years old as I record this tutorial, and if we have a glass of wine with our dinner, we will offer her a small glass of wine. She often doesn't have that. But she's within her right. I think actually, let me just write that as beer, wine, or cider. I should have put that in there. So you might want to consider that is a factor here. Now, with all that understood, let's think about what the guidance is with regard to alcohol consumption. Okay, the guidance. What is it that's kind of healthy and unhealthy? So the first bit of information I want to give you, and you'll see I've got some images to help us here, is that adults should not exceed 14 units of alcohol per week. Now that of course begs the question, well, what is 1 unit of alcohol? So what I want to do here is I've got two images here. I've got an image of a pint of beer, I suppose that's a pint, and I've got an image of sort of like a glass of wine. What I want you to realise is that in both cases, both of these examples, they are both, depending on the strength and the size of this, they are both 2 to 3 units. They are both 2 to 3 units. So what is considered to be unhealthy is anything, if you think about beer, for example, anything more than 4 pints of beer a week is getting towards being unhealthy, because you might be going in, especially if it's 3 unit strong beer, you'll be getting into sort of 15 units. And with 5 pints of beer, for example, a week, you'll be getting into 15 units and 18 units and so on. So that's an interesting guideline for you to think about. The same applies with wine. If we were considering this as 3 units per glass, we'd be saying here that four glasses of wine a week would not be considered to be deeply unhealthy, but beyond that, it becomes a relatively unhealthy, or bit by bit, a gradual and slightly concerning sort of tendency. The other thing we want to say here, folks, and I really want to stress this point, if you drink alcohol, and I am not here to say whether you should or you shouldn't in your future, but if you do, it's better if alcohol consumption is spread out. It's meant to be an S. Is spread out. So if you are, for example, a 25-year-old and you find yourself drinking 4 glasses of wine a week, if all 4 of those glasses are all on a Friday evening, for example, that's less healthy than having a glass of wine spread over 4 different days, for example. Now, I'm not encouraging anyone to drink 4 days of the week. My point is that, just technically speaking, that's the health relationship we want to be considering. And secondly, folks, it's better not to binge. Now, those points obviously relate to one another, but binge drinking is a real problem in our culture, and I'll come back to this point in a few moments' time. So with this in mind, I want to sort of just focus on binging. And of course, one of the products of binging is what we might refer to as drunkenness. drunkenness. Hopefully I've spelled that correctly. Now, drunkenness is a bit of there's an N in there. Sorry, drunkenness is a bit of a concern, and the reason is I'm going to give you some sort of like symptoms of drunkenness here, folks. And again, I'm not writing this to put you off, to put you on. I'm completely aware, for example, that for young people, going out and having a few is a relatively normal part of our culture, right? The point I'm trying to make here is that I want to clarify for you what it's like to experience that. Now, I'm assuming at this point in your life, I said before, you haven't experienced this. So what is this likely to feel like? The first thing is you're going to get feelings of drowsiness. Now, it's not necessarily consistently feeling drowsy and sleepy, but that will be part of the experience. And the reason that is because alcohol has what's called a depressant effect. So be aware of that. What's one of the things? You are likely, or someone is likely also, to experience impaired coordination. Now, this is often the thing that people find funny, like, hey, I'm stumbling and I'm falling, I'm not being myself and I'm losing my inhibitions, but your coordination is likely to be impaired. You're going to find yourself potentially wobbly on your feet. You're going to find yourself, stumbling. You're going to find yourself bumping into things. This is not uncommon. Therefore, we have a higher risk of an accident. Now, there's one thing where if someone has a couple of beers or a couple of glasses of wine and they knock over a vase on the side of a table that's been bought in Tiger is worth £2, probably no one's really that bothered, right? But if the accident is more serious and the accident involves, not crossing a road properly, for example, if that accident involves falling down something, that can be, it can become relatively serious and something you want to obviously be a little bit aware of. You might also experience what are referred to as digestive problems, and without getting too graphic, and hopefully I'm not going to misspell these things, the classic examples of digestive problems from drinking too much or being drunk. The first one is vomiting, is very, very common, but it's also not uncommon for people to experience diarrhea. And diarrhea is literally my pet hate. I'm going to try and spell it without looking at my notes. I think I've just spelled it right. Diarrhoea. Let me just check. Yeah, I hate spelling that word. I've always had problems with it. Spelling it, I mean. Occasionally other things. But that's a consideration you want to make. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not trying to paint this horrible, nasty picture. I'm just trying to give you reality. You're probably already aware of, there's some positives to this. Hey, it's silly, it's social, it's fun, and it's risky. Right, I get it. You're young people, you're daring. I get it. Honestly, I've been there. I'm just trying to give you the full and comprehensive picture. And the other thing, and of course this is something you might want to consider managing, is you are likely to experience dehydration. And the reason that alcohol leads to dehydration is your body's methodology of removing the alcohol from your system is to pass it in your urine. So therefore you urinate more and therefore you become dehydrated. So drunkenness is also associated with dehydration, and it's one of the feelings you will have after heavy drinking is following that you will be very, very thirsty, and it will affect things like your sleep as well. Now, I also want to just cover other risks of heavy drinking. Now, these in many ways are a bit more serious, okay? So I warn you, this is me going towards I guess worst case or serious situations, but they're also real situations. Heavy drinking increases violence. Now, that doesn't mean it happens in every person, or every time you go to the pub, somebody gets violent. That's just not the case. But violence is associated and often associated with alcohol consumption. It's often associated with antisocial behaviour, not respecting people's space, not respecting people's right to walk down the street and not be experience abuse and sound and noise and people's ability to sleep at night if they live in a town centre. This is obviously potentially antisocial behaviour, and alcohol can influence that. A couple of other things, again, by no means always, but alcohol is very much associated with unsafe sex, okay? And because it's associated with unsafe sex, alcohol and heavy drinking is also associated with unwanted pregnancy. Obviously not always, but sometimes it's frequently a factor, and it can also be associated with sexually transmitted infections or STIs. So it's something to be aware of. Your inhibitions and your ability to make good balanced decisions may be compromised. The other thing, just on a really practical level, people lose stuff. Loss of possessions. If you really value your iPhone, what's the big one at the moment, 13 Pro, or that's the one that's out right now. If you've got one of them and you don't want to lose it, getting really smashed is going to be a risk to that, okay? Wallets, phones, money, keys, car keys, these are the things that tend to go missing when someone has been drinking. I'm not suggesting someone should have car keys on them. Of course, they shouldn't be driving, clearly. And finally, you want to be careful with this one, but it might also be that you experience unplanned time, and I'm thinking about adults here, time off work, and I'll put college in there as well, because of course adults do go to college at age 18. But of course, one of the things, you might be, for example, doing A-levels as a 17, 18-year-old, and you might think, okay, it's a Saturday night or whatever, I'm going to go out, and you might have an exam on Monday. That drinking is going to affect the exam on Monday. You're going to be tired, it's going to affect your sleep. You may feel rough the next day. These are things to bear in mind. Anyway, that's what I wanted to address with you with regard to alcohol. Again, I want to make my assumption clear. I'm assuming you don't drink right now, but I'm assuming in the future you will face a choice as to whether to drink or not, and if you do, how to drink, and therefore that's the aim of this tutorial. Cheers.